So again, patience is a virtue in all circumstances. Patience is probably a health necessity on a night like tonight as we are starting to get our first poll closings. At 7 o'clock, we're looking at Georgia, Indiana, Kentucky, South Carolina, Vermont, and Virginia. And we will give you these results as they come in. The NBC News election desk feeds these to us just as we get there. But at 7 o'clock on the East Coast, as polls close in those states, these are the results as we can see them now. In the Georgia Senate race between Democrat Raphael Warnock and Republican Herschel Walker, this race is too early to call. In the Indiana Senate race, the projected winner of the Indiana Senate race is incumbent Republican Todd Young. In the South Carolina Senate race, the projected winner is the incumbent Republican Tim Scott. In the Kentucky Senate race, this race is too early to call, but Republican incumbent Rand Paul is projected as leading in this race in Kentucky. In the Vermont Senate race, this is also too early to call. This is an open Senate race in Vermont. This is too early to call, but the Democrat, Peter Welch, is characterized as being in the lead. This is the overall picture of the U.S. Senate at this hour. Blue seats held by Democrats, red seats held by Republicans. All the ones that are grayed out are those yet to be decided. Right now, the Democrats hold 36. The Republicans hold 31. That means we're looking at 33 undecided seats. In the governor's races, at this hour, we are looking at the Georgia governor's race. This race between incumbent Republican Brian Kemp and his Democratic challenger, Stacey Abrams. This race is too early to call, the Georgia governor's race at this hour. Up to South Carolina. The South Carolina governor's race, we have an incumbent Republican, Henry McMaster, against his Democratic challenger, Joe Cunningham. This is too early to call in the South Carolina governor's race. And in the Vermont governor's race, we have an incumbent Republican governor in Vermont. His name is Phil Scott. He's facing a Democratic challenger, Brenda Siegel. In the Vermont governor's race, this is, at this hour, too early to call. So as promised, at 7 o'clock, lots of poll closings, but only a few of them called. Steve. NBC News can now project that there is a winner in the Kentucky U.S. Senate race. Incumbent Republican Rand Paul is the projected winner. He has been reelected in Kentucky. His Democratic challenger, Charles Booker, would have been the first African-American senator from Kentucky, but Rand Paul has held onto his seat. This is a look at the United States Senate at this hour. Democrats currently control 36 seats. Republicans control 32 seats. 32 seats remain undecided, as does overall control of the chamber. Now, NBC's Vaughn Hilliard is in paradise. That is going to be one of the most important things to parse on the Republican side out of this. At 7:30, we've got poll closings in North Carolina and in Ohio and in West Virginia. Again, the NBC News decision desk will give us projections as best as they can. Some of these may be too early. Some of these may be too close. They will not project a winner in a race until they are more than 99% certain that will be the outcome of that race. You can have confidence in these projections. At 7:30 on the East Coast, in the North Carolina Senate race, this is an open Senate seat previously held by the Republicans. Republican Congressman Ted Budd versus Democrat Sherry Beasley. This race is too early to call, the North Carolina Senate race. In the Ohio Senate race, the very closely watched open Ohio Senate race, previously again held by a Republican. It is now open. Republican J.D. Vance against Democrat Tim Ryan. The Ohio Senate race is too early to call. There is a governor's race where we've had a poll closing as well in Ohio. The Ohio governor, Republican incumbent Mike DeWine, is the projected winner. Mike DeWine is reelected as the Ohio governor. And those are the three races that we're able to make projections for with the poll closings at. So we're about to get more projections. Some of them may be too early to call in a number of cases, but we're about to get more projections in more states than we get at any other time of the night. Again, 8 o'clock, the key races that we're going to be looking at in here are places like Pennsylvania and New Hampshire, where there are very close races. But we've got a bunch of governor's races up. We've got a bunch of Senate races up. And here's what the NBC News election desk tells us we can tell you about those races at this hour, at 8 p.m. Eastern. In the Florida Senate race, the projected winner is incumbent Republican Marco Rubio. In the Pennsylvania Senate race, the very closely watched race there, it is too early to call between Democrat John Fetterman and Republican Mehmet Oz. Again, too early to call in Pennsylvania. In the New Hampshire Senate race, too early to call between incumbent Democrat Senator Maggie Hassan and her Republican challenger Don Baldock. Again, too early to call in New Hampshire. In the Alabama Senate race, Alabama will have a female elected senator for the first time. Republican Katie Britt is the projected winner of the Alabama U.S. Senate race. In the Oklahoma Senate race, there are two of these. This is James Lankford, incumbent Republican senator running for re-election. He is projected as the winner of this race. He has been re-elected. In the Oklahoma other Senate race, this is a special election to fill the term of retiring U.S. Senator Jim Inhofe. The projected winner in the Oklahoma special is Republican Mark Wayne Mullen. Up to the Northeast, the Connecticut Senate race there. Incumbent Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal facing a challenge from Republican Leora Levy. This is too early to call, but Senator Blumenthal leads in that race. Similarly, in Maryland, we've got an incumbent Democrat, Chris Van Hollen. It is too early to call, but Senator Van Hollen leads in this race against his Republican challenger, Mr. Chafee. In Missouri, in the Missouri Senate race, it is too early to call between Republican Eric Schmidt and Democrat Trudy Bush Valentine, but Eric Schmidt is leading in that Missouri Senate race. And in the Illinois Senate race, where Democratic incumbent Tammy Duckworth is facing a challenge from Republican Kathy Salvi, that race right now is too early to call. Looking at the overall picture of the United States Senate at this hour, look at that. 36 and 36. Democrats control 36 seats, as do the Republicans. There are 28 seats yet to be decided, as is control of the United States Senate. Now, we've got a whole bunch of different governor's races to project for you. The Florida governor's race we'll be looking at first. The projected winner of the Florida governor's race is incumbent Republican Ron DeSantis, defeating Democrat Charlie Crist. In the Pennsylvania governor's race, it is too early to call between Democrat Josh Shapiro and Republican Doug Mastriano. Too early to call in Pennsylvania. In the Maryland governor's race, also too early to call between Democrat Wes Moore and Republican Dan Cox, although Democrat Wes Moore is leading in this race. In the Massachusetts governor's race, again, too early to call between Republican Jeff Deal and Democrat Maura Healey, but Democrat Maura Healey is leading in the Massachusetts governor's race. In the Alabama governor's race, Republican incumbent Governor Kay Ivey is projected to have been reelected as the governor of Alabama. In the Connecticut governor's race, it is too early to call between incumbent Democrat Ned Lamont and his Republican challenger Bob Stefanowski. In the Illinois governor's race, it is J.B. Pritzker, the Democrat incumbent, who is facing a challenge from Republican Darren Bailey. It is too early to call in the Illinois governor's race. In the Maine governor's race, Democratic incumbent Janet Mills is facing a challenge from Republican former Governor Paul LePage. It is too early to call in the Maine governor's race. In the New Hampshire governor's race, it is too early to call between Republican incumbent Chris Sununu and his Democratic challenger Tom Sherman, although Chris Sununu is leading in that race in New Hampshire. In the Rhode Island governor's race, too early to call between incumbent Democrat Daniel McKee and his Republican challenger Ashley Kalus. Too early to call in Rhode Island. In the Tennessee governor's race, the incumbent governor is Republican Bill Lee. He's facing Democratic challenger Jason Martin. This is too early to call, although Bill Lee is leading in that Tennessee governor's race. And finally, in the Oklahoma governor's race, the incumbent there is Republican Kevin Stitt, facing a stiff challenge from Democratic challenger Joy Hoffmeister. The Oklahoma governor's race at this hour is too early to call. We've got a winner to project in the South Carolina governor's race. The incumbent Republican Henry McMaster is projected to be reelected as South Carolina governor. As I said, this is the largest number of poll closings we're having at any one time on the clock. I'm sorry to interrupt you just for a call.
Yeah.
It's in the New Hampshire governor's race. I would only interrupt you for this purpose. The New Hampshire governor's race, we have a projected winner. Republican incumbent Chris Sununu is the projected winner. He has been reelected in New Hampshire against his Democratic challenger, Tom Sherman. I'm sorry. And a second call there as well. Tennessee governor's race. Again, an incumbent Republican governor, this time in Tennessee. Bill Lee is projected to be reelected against his Democratic challenger, Jason Martin. Again, so that's calls both in the Tennessee governor's race and in the New Hampshire governor's race. Two Republican incumbents there holding on to their seats. Steve, I'm sorry to have interrupted. I know you were about to talk about New Hampshire anyway. Before we move on to anything else, I need to tell you that we do have a projection to make in the Massachusetts governor's race. The Democrat Maura Healey is the projected winner in Massachusetts. This is a pickup for the Democratic Party in terms of governor's races. The previous Republican governor elected not to run for re-election. He did not. Jeff Deal was the Republican challenger here. Maura Healey, neither of these is an incumbent, but this is a pickup for the Democrats in the Massachusetts governor's race. Chris Hayes, go ahead. We have one more call that we need to make, which has just happened just in the last second. If we can put that up on the screen, NBC News can now project that in Vermont, the projected winner in the Vermont Senate race is Democrat Peter Welch. Again, we also just had a call in the Massachusetts governor's race. This is the Senate at this hour. Democrats now with that Peter Welch victory in Vermont holding 37 seats in the Senate. Republicans holding 36, 27 seats still undecided. All right, we're going to take a quick breath. We've got another set of poll closings coming up in 6 minutes. We'll be right back with that after this. Stay with us. Just coming up on 8:30 Eastern right now, this is the status of the Pennsylvania Senate race. It's too early to call between Democrat John Fetterman and Republican Mehmet Oz. We're also looking at an Ohio Senate race that is similarly characterized as too early to call between Democrat Tim Ryan and J.D. Vance. I do have one interesting House race to tell you about in Florida's 10th district. We're highlighting this race because Maxwell Frost is the projected winner here. He's the Democrat in this race. He's 25 years old. He is the first representative of Gen Z to be elected to the United States Congress. He is 25, which means he was born in 1997, which I think is mathematically impossible.
It is.
Actually, literally.
You did not do that math right. I think you messed it up.
I didn't do that math right.
No,
but
81.
Well, and in an age of malaise and feelings like people have given up on the system, obviously there's another generation right behind.
At 8:30 p.m. Eastern, we have just had one big poll closing in the great state of Arkansas. We've got a Senate race and a governor's race in Arkansas that we have been watching. And the NBC News election desk tells us at this hour it is too early to call between incumbent Republican John Boozman and his Democratic challenger Natalie James, although Boozman leads. And in the Arkansas governor's race, that race is also characterized at this hour as too early to call, although Republican Sarah Huckabee Sanders is leading in this race against Democrat Chris Jones. This, of course, would be Sarah Huckabee Sanders taking the governorship of Arkansas, a job previously held by her father, Mike Huckabee, which is an unusual succession in American. I want to update us on, we've got another call, I have to tell you. In the governor's race in the great state of Vermont, we have a projection. The Republican governor of Vermont, Phil Scott, the incumbent governor, has been reelected. That's a new projection in the Vermont governor's race. He's defeated his Democratic challenger, Brenda Siegel. We're going to sneak in a quick break here, just to keep you in the loop in terms of what we are heading toward. 9 o'clock poll closings in lots of the most closely watched states in the country. At the top of this hour, we're looking at poll closings in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Arizona, Colorado, Iowa, Kansas, Louisiana, Minnesota, Nebraska, New Mexico, New York, North Dakota, South Dakota, Texas, Wyoming. That's all coming up in less than a half an hour. We'll be right back. Stay with us. We have a new call in a new race. This is the Rhode Island governor's race. NBC News election desk can now project that the incumbent Democratic governor of Rhode Island, Dan McKee, has been reelected against his Republican challenger, Ashley Kalus. Again, Rhode Island governor, that is a Democratic hold for that governor's race. Now, This hour, NBC News can project that in the Arkansas U.S. Senate race, incumbent Republican John Boozman has won. He has been reelected against his Democratic challenger, Natalie James. Again, that's the Arkansas Senate race. Senator Boozman reelected. This is the status of the U.S. Senate at this hour. Both parties holding 37 seats. There are 26 seats still undecided, as is the overall control of the United States Senate. Steve Kornacki, we're coming up on 9 o'clock poll closings. But before we get there, do you have an update on the New Hampshire Senate race? Abortion ban, yes is a vote for the abortion ban.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Steve, thank you very much. I'm sorry to be abrupt there, but we've got a poll closing right now, a whole raft of them at 9 o'clock. Obviously, big Senate races still outstanding. Georgia Senate, Pennsylvania Senate, Ohio Senate. But one of the other big ones we are watching for is in Arizona, and that is one of the races that in a state in which polls have just closed. So at this hour, at 9 o'clock Eastern, this is what we've got. In the Arizona Senate race, it is too early to call between Democratic incumbent Mark Kelly and his Republican challenger Blake Masters. Too early to call in Arizona Senate. In the Wisconsin Senate race, incumbent Republican Ron Johnson, too early to call against his Democratic challenger Mandela Barnes. In the New York Senate race, the Democratic Senate leader Charles Schumer is the projected winner. Charles Schumer projected to be reelected, as is Kansas Republican Senator Jerry Moran. In the South Dakota Senate race, John Thune, senior member of the Republican leadership in the U.S. Senate, projected to be reelected tonight. In the Colorado Senate race, incumbent Democrat Michael Bennet, too early to call against his Republican challenger Joe O'Dea. In Iowa, in the Iowa Senate race, Chuck Grassley, the incumbent Republican, too early to call against his Democratic challenger Michael Franken. In the Louisiana Senate race, incumbent Republican John Kennedy, too early to call against his Democratic challenger Gary Chambers. In the North Dakota Senate race, this is too early to call, but incumbent Republican John Hoeven is in the lead against his Democratic challenger. This is the overall state of the Senate at this hour. Democrats holding 38 seats, Republicans holding 39, 23 seats still undecided. Now let's have a look at some of the governor's races this hour. Again, with 9 p.m. poll closings, in the Arizona governor's race, it is too early to call between Democrat Katie Hobbs and Republican Kari Lake. In the New York governor's race, it is too early to call between incumbent Democrat Kathy Hochul and her Republican challenger Lee Zeldin. In the Texas governor's race, incumbent Republican Greg Abbott is in the lead, although it is too early to call between him and Democrat Beto O'Rourke. In the Wisconsin governor's race, it is Democratic incumbent Tony Evers against Republican Tim Michels. That is too early to call in Wisconsin governor's race. In the Colorado governor's race, it is a Democratic incumbent Jared Polis facing Republican Heidi Ganahl. That is too early to call in the Colorado governor's race. In the Iowa governor's race, Republican incumbent Kim Reynolds against Democrat Deidre DeGear. This is too early to call, but incumbent Republican Kim Reynolds is leading in Iowa. In the Kansas governor's race, we've got a Democratic incumbent there, Laura Kelly, who is facing Republican Derek Schmidt. That is too early to call in the Kansas governor's race. In the Michigan governor's race, Democratic incumbent Gretchen Whitmer, too early to call versus Republican challenger Tudor Dixon. In the Nebraska governor's race, it is too early to call between Republican Jim Pillen and Democrat Carol Blood. Again, Nebraska governor, too early to call. In the New Mexico governor's race, too early to call between incumbent Democrat Michelle Lujan Grisham and her Republican challenger Mark Ronchetti. In the South Dakota governor's race, it is too early to call between incumbent Republican Kristi Noem and her Democratic challenger Jamie Smith, although Governor Noem is leading in this South Dakota governor's race. And lastly, in the Wyoming governor's race, too early to call between Republican incumbent Mark Gordon and Democrat Teresa Livingston, although Republican incumbent Mark Gordon is leading in that Wyoming governor's race. Whew.
Good job.
I need to interrupt you just for a moment because we do have a call to make. NBC News has a projection to make, in another Senate race. This is the We have it here. Yes, we do. This is the North Dakota Senate race. This is incumbent Republican John Hoeven, who is projected to have been reelected in the North Dakota Senate race. His Democratic challenger was Katrina Christensen, but Hoeven will be heading back to the United States Senate. Steve, I will take advantage of the fact that I had to interrupt you there to actually ask you about a different Senate race. Can I ask you about North Carolina Senate, where we've got Sherry Beasley, the Democrat, and Republican Congressman Ted Budd?
Yeah, let's take a closer look here at North Carolina. Zoom out.
Official calls that I can tell you on two other governor's races. NBC News can now project at this hour in the governor's race in the great state of Colorado. The Democratic incumbent governor there, Jared Polis, has been reelected. His Republican challenger was not able to go the distance in the Arkansas governor's race. Sarah Huckabee Sanders will be the next governor of the state of Arkansas, following in the footsteps of her father, Mike Huckabee. We're going to take a quick break right now. We've got much more when we come back. We've got all those marquee Senate races that we are still watching. And as our political insiders were just alluding to, in terms of what's happening in their House, the Republicans knew they would have a good night tonight. It looks like it may not be quite the huge night that they were expecting. We'll try to put some data on that impression when we get back. Stay with us. Michael Steele, avatar of the future. We've got a Maryland Senate race to call, and NBC News projects that the winner in the Maryland Senate race is incumbent Democrat Chris Van Hollen, defeating his Republican challenger Chris Chafee. And at this hour in the Senate, that means we are looking at 39 Senate seats under Democratic Party control and 40 Senate seats under Republican Party control, 21 seats yet to be decided. And in the aforementioned Maryland governor's race, here it is. NBC News projects that the winner of the Maryland governor's race is Wes Moore. So Democrats picking up that governor's seat in Maryland and holding on to that Senate seat in Maryland. In terms of what's going on in the House, before you do Ohio 1, but stick a pin in that, I'll come right back to you. We have a quick call that we need to make. It's in an important Senate race, the Colorado Senate race. NBC News can now project that incumbent Democratic Senator Michael Bennet has been reelected in the Colorado Senate race. This was a highly tightly watched race because the Republicans were very confident in their candidate there, Joe O'Dea, but Joe O'Dea comes up short, and Michael Bennet will be returning to the Senate. Back to you, Steve.
Yeah. So, and that, by the way, that Colorado call, it has implications for the Senate, as you say. There's also a competitive House race in Colorado, too. And if Michael Bennett's doing well, that might portend well for the Democrats in that House race. But we're looking at here, again, we've established that.
Quick call before we do that. Right now, NBC News at this hour is able to project that in the Oklahoma governor's race, the Republican incumbent Kevin Stitt will be reelected. This was not a foregone conclusion, even though Oklahoma is such a reliably red state. Joy Hoffmeister ran a great campaign against Kevin Stitt, and he ran into a lot of bumps in the road, but NBC News now projects that he will be returned as the incumbent governor of Oklahoma. Back to what Steve was saying. I mean, again, it's early days, and woe be upon any. If you don't mind, I'd like to ask you a question about, excuse me. Forgive me, I'm interrupting myself. There is a projection to make. NBC News projects at this hour that the Republican incumbent governor of South Dakota, Kristi Noem, has been reelected in that state. Forgive me. Kristi Noem will be returned to the governor's mansion in South Dakota. Steve, I wanted to ask you about a race characterization change that we just had. I do have at least one call to make. In the Louisiana U.S. Senate race, NBC News can now project that incumbent Republican Senator John Kennedy has been reelected. His Democratic opponent was Gary Chambers, but John Kennedy will be returning to the United States Senate. At this hour, the Democrats control 40 seats in the Senate. The Republicans control 41. There's still 19 seats to go. We do have two minor changes in characterization, both in the same direction. In the New York governor's race, this race is still considered too early to call, but I can tell you that NBC now describes this as a race in which Kathy Hochul is in the lead. Again, too early to call, but incumbent Democrat Kathy Hochul in the lead. Similarly, in the Maine governor's race, the Democratic incumbent there is Janet Mills. It is too early to call between her and her Republican challenger, the former governor of Maine, Paul LePage. It is too early to call, but NBC News' election desk now characterizes Democratic incumbent Janet Mills as being in the lead. So again, in the New York governor's race and in the Maine governor's race.
I think the fact that they ran on crime and they ran on inflation and they didn't have any solutions, voters saw through some of that.
Yep. 10 o'clock. In about 15 seconds here on the East Coast. The poll closings at 10 o'clock are Montana and Nevada and Utah. Again, we're still watching all of the close Senate races in the country right now, but with polls closing right now in those 3 states, this is what we can tell you in terms of the NBC News election desk and projections at this hour. In the Nevada Senate race, we've got a Democratic incumbent, Catherine Cortez Masto, facing a Republican challenge from Adam Laxalt. This race is currently not characterized on our screen, but I believe this is too early to call. Correct? Yes. In the Utah Senate race, incumbent Republican Mike Lee facing an independent challenge from Evan McMullin. This is also too early to call. In the Nevada governor's race, we're looking at a Democratic incumbent, Steve Sisolak, who's facing a Republican challenge from Joe Lombardo. This is also too early to call. Again, so too early in Nevada Senate, Utah Senate, and Nevada governors. Let's recap what's going on in some of these closely watched Senate races. The North Carolina Senate race, it is too close to call between Republican Ted Budd and Democrat Sherry Beasley. In the Georgia Senate race, it is too early to call between Democratic incumbent Raphael Warnock and Republican Herschel Walker. Look how tight they are. In the Ohio Senate race, it is too early to call between Republican J.D. Vance and Democrat Tim Ryan. That's with about 2/3 of the vote in. In the Pennsylvania Senate race, with about 40% of the vote in, it is too early to call between Democrat John Fetterman and Republican Mehmet Oz. In the New Hampshire, interesting Senate race here, it is too early to call. Maggie Hassan, the Democratic incumbent, facing Republican Don Baldock. We've got a little bit less than 40% of the vote in. It is too early to call in New Hampshire. And in Arizona, we are looking at a too early to call race between Mark Kelly, the Democratic incumbent, and the Republican challenger, Blake Masters. At this hour, the Democrats control 40 Senate seats. The Republicans control 41. 19 are still in play. Steve, we've been talking a lot about the overall battle for the House and these individual House races that you're watching. You got more new news for us on that front?
Yeah. Why don't we start in Ohio? Because we talked about Ohio's important, a couple different districts.
Steve, thank you. We have a few updates for our viewers in terms of characterizations of various races. In the Nebraska governor's race, NBC News can now project that the Republican in that race, Jim Pillen, is the projected winner in the Nebraska governor's race. Over to Wyoming, NBC News can now project that the winner of the Wyoming governor's race is the Republican incumbent Mark Gordon. He has been reelected. We have a change in characterization in the Pennsylvania governor's race. This race is still overall considered to be too early to call, but NBC News says that Josh Shapiro is leading in the Pennsylvania governor's race. We have another similar change in the New Hampshire Senate race, which at base level is still considered to be too early to call. But NBC News now says that incumbent Democratic Senator Maggie Hassan is leading in the New Hampshire Senate race. We also want to look in on one race that is a statewide race of national interest for a lot of reasons. The New York Attorney General's race. Democrat Letitia James is projected to be reelected as New York's Attorney General. She is the projected winner in New York. Obviously, Letitia James has a very high-profile role as New York's Attorney General, in large part because of her office's work to investigate and bring a civil case and be involved in a criminal case involving the business of former President Donald Trump. Steve, I would like to go back to you on the Wisconsin Senate race, if you've got anything, especially given what we were talking about. In the Illinois Senate race, NBC News can now project that in the Illinois Senate race, Democratic incumbent Tammy Duckworth is reelected. Tammy Duckworth will be returning to the United States Senate. In the Georgia Senate race, this was previously characterized as too early to call. This is now too close to call between Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker. I don't know, at 49-49 with less than 700 votes between them. How do you call that too close to call? That's with just under 80% of the vote. It is too close to call in the Georgia Senate race. In the Illinois governor's race, NBC News can now project that Democratic incumbent J.B. Pritzker, governor of Illinois, has been reelected. He has defeated his Republican challenger. And in the Wisconsin governor's race, this is previously too early to call. It is now too close to call between Wisconsin Democratic incumbent Tony Evers and his Republican challenger, Tim Michels. That's with about 43% of the vote in, too close to call in the Wisconsin governor's race. And on that note, I'd like to go to, we do have a new characterization, a new call, actually, in the Iowa governor's race. NBC News can now project that the Republican incumbent governor of Iowa, Kim Reynolds, has defeated her Democratic challenger, and Kim Reynolds will be reelected as Iowa's Republican governor. You guys, what Steve was just saying there about those House races.
I mean, and Lawrence talked about the
seeing in terms of the vote as it is coming in Pennsylvania. I do want to give you a couple of updates here. In the governor's race in the great state of Texas, Republican incumbent Governor Greg Abbott is projected to be the winner. He is reelected. He has defeated Democratic challenger Beto O'Rourke. Again, Texas Governor Greg Abbott will be returning to office in that state. We have one other race to characterize, though, and this is very interesting. This is a House race. Look at this. Virginia, 7th District, Democrat Abigail Spanberger projected to be the winner of this race. She is reelected against her Republican challenger, Leslie Vega. We've been watching with Steve the numbers come in on this, watching this as a bellwether race, watching this as a key race in terms of how well Republicans were going to be able to perform potentially nationwide tonight. But the early numbers, I mean, as an amateur looking at these things, didn't look promising for Abigail Spanberger, but Congresswoman Spanberger's coming back.
She's one of those candidates that ran on the infrastructure bill. She was one of those moderate Democrats who were taking advantage of the infrastructure bill. It shows you that
in an important Senate race, the Ohio Senate race. This has previously been characterized by NBC News as too early to call. It is still too early to call, but NBC News now says that Republican candidate J.D. Vance is leading in this Ohio Senate race. We're going to be getting more information about that. We're also going to be taking a quick break right now because when we come back, we're going to be getting sorry, we have another call. I hereby interrupt myself to tell you that there is a projection in the Pennsylvania governor's race. Democrat Josh Shapiro is the projected winner against Republican candidate Doug Mastriano. Wow. In Pennsylvania, again, we do not have a characterization of a winner, let alone a leader even, in the Senate race. But in this governor's race, NBC News has projected the winner. Josh Shapiro versus Doug Mastriano was one of the starkest. Well, I mean, I will say the Wisconsin races, both the governor's race and the Senate race in Wisconsin are very, very stark contrast between. Because I have a characterization to make in the Missouri Senate race. NBC News is now projecting at this hour that in the Missouri Senate race, the Republican candidate Eric Schmidt is the projected winner. Again, Missouri Senate. Also in the Iowa Senate race, longtime incumbent Republican Chuck Grassley is projected to be reelected to his seat. We also have a change in characterization in one governor's race. Now, this is the governor's race in Kansas. This is an interesting governor's race where we've got an incumbent Democratic Governor Laura Kelly. This was previously characterized as too early to call. It's now too close to call between Laura Kelly and her Republican challenger, Derek Schmidt. Again, Kansas governor is now too close to call. We do have a projection in the New Mexico governor's race, though. The incumbent Democrat there, Michelle Lujan Grisham, is projected to be reelected as New Mexico governor. She faced a strong challenge from Mark Ronchetti, the Republican, in that race, but Michelle Lujan Grisham will be governor for another term in New Mexico. Nicole, you wanted to ask Steve something about Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Steve.
We have a characterization to make in another closely watched House race. This is Kansas, the 3rd district. This is a race where you've got both interesting candidates on both sides, but also one of those districts that's seen as a potential bellwether. This was a pickup the Republicans really wanted. They did not get it. This is Kansas's 3rd congressional district. The incumbent Democrat there is Sharice Davids. Her Republican challenger was Amanda Adkins. I think Republicans expected this one, but NBC News can now project that the winner will be Sharice Davids. She will be returning to the House. I'm sorry to interrupt you. We have an important call in a very closely watched race. This is a Senate race projection in the great state of New Hampshire. Republicans really wanted to pick off incumbent Democratic Senator Maggie Hassan. They have failed in their efforts to do so. Maggie Hassan, the incumbent Democratic senator, will be returning to the United States Senate, having beaten back a challenge from Republican Don Baldock. Don Baldock was not the person who odds makers wanted to win on the Republican side if they were hoping for a closer contest there. But he put up a race against her that put the fear into Democrats that they might lose that seat. At this hour, the Democrats hold 42 seats. The Republicans hold 43. 15 seats remain undecided. Steve, back to you. Oh, yeah. Sorry, hold on. I've been told that I should not go back to you because I can interrupt myself again. In the Connecticut U.S. Senate race, the Democratic incumbent Richard Blumenthal will also be returning to the United States Senate. Again, so we've just had calls in New Hampshire and in Connecticut, Democratic incumbents winning those seats and will be reelected. That puts us at 43-43 as the balance of power in seats that have been assigned to either party. In the Senate, 14 seats remain undecided. Am I going to interrupt myself again?
I think we need those memes. We need a meme of 2 Rachels, like the Spider-Man meme where they're like facing each other. There need to be a Rachel and a Rachel facing
I can just actually...
I'm going to make a projection right now. We have a projection in that Ohio Senate race where NBC News is currently projecting that J.D. Vance, he of formerly Yale Law, Silicon Valley, and hillbilly elegy, will be joining the U.S. Senate, defeating Tim Ryan, a congressman from Youngstown area, who ran what everyone thought was a great race. But those numbers there, 54-46, as we're projecting this, Michael Steele, they look like the gravity of the partisan makeup of Ohio in the year 2022, pulling that race to its fundamentals.
Yeah, and in many respects, that's true. I think the other dynamic when you look at that race, particularly given...
Doug Mastriano was the Republican challenger. The Democratic Attorney General Josh Shapiro is the winner. We're expecting a victory speech from Josh Shapiro a few moments after the top of the hour. To the extent that we are able, we will try to bring you some of that Josh Shapiro victory speech in Pennsylvania, in that Pennsylvania governor's race, right after these polls close. At 11 o'clock on the East Coast, we've got polls closing in 4 states. NBC News election desk can project at this hour these races as follows. In the California Senate race, the projected winner is Democratic incumbent Alex Padilla. Alex Padilla will be returning to the United States Senate. In the Idaho Senate race, the projected winner is the incumbent Republican Mike Crapo. In the Oregon Senate race, it is right now too early to call between incumbent Democrat Ron Wyden and his Republican challenger Joe Ray Perkins. In the Washington Senate race, we've got incumbent Democrat Patty Murray facing a Republican challenge from Tiffany Smiley. That race is also too early to call. Looking now at some of the governor's races, we have the California governor's race. Incumbent Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom is projected to have won that race. He will be reelected as California governor. In the Idaho governor's race, the incumbent Republican is Brad Little. He is also projected as the winner. He will be projected to be reelected to that race. And in the Oregon governor's race, which is a very interesting one, it is too early to call between Democrat Tina Kotek and the Republican Christine Drazan. Now, again, in that Oregon race, it's worth watching a third-party candidate who may be determinative in that fact, but we shall see. In the Wisconsin Senate race, recapping some of our previous races here, but actually this one is a change in characterization. This one previously had been too early to call. It is now too close to call in Wisconsin between incumbent Republican Ron Johnson and his Democratic challenger Mandela Barnes. In the Georgia Senate race, it is too close to call between Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock, with about 86% of the vote in. In the North Carolina Senate race, with just over 90% of the vote in, it is too close to call between Republican Ted Budd and Democrat Sherry Beasley. In the Pennsylvania Senate race, we've got about 71% of the vote in. It is too early to call between John Fetterman, the Democrat, and Republican Mehmet Oz. And in the Arizona Senate race, we've got 51% of the vote in. It is too early to call between Democratic incumbent Mark Kelly and Republican challenger Blake Masters. At this hour, this is the control of the United States Senate. The Republicans holding 45 seats, the Democrats holding 44, with that dwindling number of undecided seats. 11 Senate seats still to be called. There is one House race that we want to point out here. This is the Vermont at-large House race. And the reason that we are highlighting this race in particular between Becca Balint and Liam Madden, Becca Balint, the Democrat, and Liam Madden, the Republican, is that in this race, if Becca Balint wins this, she will be the first person ever elected to Vermont while being female. We have never had a woman elected either to the House or the Senate from the great state of Vermont. If Becca Balint wins this race, she will make history in that way in Vermont. Do we also have a characterization on the Vermont abortion race? We'll get back to that in just a moment. We have a call in a governor's race in Georgia. Incumbent Republican Brian Kemp is projected to be reelected as Georgia governor. Democrat Stacey Abrams was his challenger, but Brian Kemp will return to the governor's mansion in the great state of Georgia. And as I just mentioned just a moment ago, we're keeping an eye on some of these abortion measures around the country. Vermont is one of 3 states where voters were asked to enshrine reproductive rights, reproductive liberty in the state constitution. That has won in Vermont. The yes vote is a vote to enshrine abortion rights in the state constitution in Vermont. That measure has won in Vermont. Ooh, lots going on there. In terms of, at this point, we have a projection in an important race. This is a governor's race in New York. NBC News at this hour can project that Democratic incumbent Kathy Hochul is elected as New York governor. It may not seem from 30,000 feet like a Democrat winning a New York governor's race is a big deal, but there was a scare for Democrats here with an unexpectedly strong challenge from Republican Lee Zeldin. But Lee Zeldin has come up short in that challenge, and Kathy Hochul will remain as New York's governor. Sorry, back to you, Steve.
Yeah, no, and New York is a big part of this story when we're talking about the battle for House control here. And again, just showing you some of these vulnerable.
We've got a projection that we need to make in an important and closely watched U.S. Senate race. This is the U.S. Senate race in the great state of North Carolina. This is an open Senate seat made open by a Republican retirement, but the projected winner is the Republican candidate. Republican Congressman Ted Budd had a hard-fought race against Democrat Sherry Beasley, who's the former state Supreme Court Chief Justice. But Ted Budd is the projected winner in North Carolina. I want to bring in our friend Claire McCaskill, actually, in response to some of the stuff that we have just been hearing, and in response to this North Carolina race that we've just had the projection in. Claire. NBC News at this hour can now project in the Senate race in the great state of Oregon that incumbent Democratic Senator Ron Wyden has been reelected to the Senate in Oregon. We also have an interesting projection in the governor's race in Oregon. And this is one that everybody's been talking about as the sleeper race of the year. And with that many people calling it that, it's no longer that much of a sleeper. But in this case, we've got the Democrat Tina Kotek, the Republican Ms. Drazen, and the independent candidate, Ms. Johnson. And in this case, this is now considered to be not too early to call, but too close to call. It is a change in the characterization of the race. This is a very unusual set of dynamics in this race. Republicans have been hoping that this dynamic might result in Oregon picking a Republican governor, which seems strange given the overall blue cast of the state. But right now, this is too close to call with half of the vote in the state of Oregon. We also have an interesting House race in which we can now make a projection. Steve has been talking about this all night. This is the 9th congressional district in the great state of Ohio. Veteran Democratic incumbent Marcy Kaptur facing a Republican challenge from J.R. Majewski, who made a number of statements during the course of the campaign that caused even the House Republican Campaign Committee to abandon him. That may or may not have made the difference, but Marcy Kaptur is going back to the House. We have one other characterization that we can now make, just coming in right now, in the Washington U.S. Senate race, Democratic incumbent Patty Murray. This was not a shoo-in race, but Democratic incumbent Senator Patty Murray will be returning to the United States Senate. This is the new characterization in the Pennsylvania Senate race. It is too early to call, but I want to make sure that I get this right. John Fetterman is now described by NBC News as being in the lead in this race. I want to go back to Claire McCaskill on this, given what we were just describing. Claire?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, isn't it, that we had the Republican scare.
NBC News has a projection on the question related to abortion that was put to California voters tonight. A yes vote was to enshrine reproductive rights, reproductive liberties in the state constitution in California. NBC News projects that that abortion proposition in California succeeds. It is yes to add reproductive rights to the state constitution. Similarly, in Vermont, NBC News projects that Vermont voters have also chosen to enshrine reproductive rights in the state constitution. There are 3 other states in which this is being considered one way or another tonight on the ballot. In Kentucky, voters were asked to vote for an abortion ban. Right now, with 77% of the vote in, Kentucky voters seem to be voting no, but it is close. Again, a no vote here is no. It's a vote against a new abortion ban in Kentucky. A yes vote is for abortion to remain legal. In Montana, we've got less than 20% of the vote in, but this is similar. You can think of this similarly to what we're seeing in Kentucky. A no vote here is a no vote against a new abortion ban in Montana. A yes vote is a vote for the ban. In Michigan, this is a very closely watched one in Michigan. Michigan, like California, like Vermont, a yes vote would enshrine reproductive rights in the state constitution. Right now, with just over a third of the vote in, this proposal appears to be leading. Again, with only a third of the vote in, we can't really say. But these are the results thus far in Michigan on enshrining the right to an abortion in the state constitution. You know, all 5 of those states, we have a couple of calls and a change in characterization in a governor's race. First of all, let's look at the governor's race in Connecticut. NBC News can now project that Democratic incumbent Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont will be returned for another term. Also, in Maine, the Maine governor's race, the Democratic incumbent there is Janet Mills. She was facing a challenge from former Republican Governor Paul LePage, who likes to call himself Trump before there was Trump. Janet Mills has beaten Trump before there was Trump. Paul LePage falls short in his challenge. Janet Mills is reelected in the great state of Maine. And now here's the characterization change. This is the Minnesota governor's race. This is still described as too early to call. This is incumbent Democrat Tim Walz facing Republican Scott Jensen. It's still too early to call, but Tim Walz is described as being in the lead in this Minnesota governor's race. Chris, you wanted to jump in and ask Steve something, and
Our decision desk's model that they've just released within the last minute is that the Republicans will end up with 219 seats.
But look,
plus
this is important.
Or minus 13. So this is essentially landing in our model as a tie at the moment, as close as you could get to a tie for House control in our model at midnight on election night. So all of those different tiers that I'm showing you right now, and all of the trends that are emerging in the counties and the districts that have been called, or where we have partial results, when you put those into our model, and the model gets smarter with the more data you feed it with, it adds up right now to Republicans 219, could be less, could be more. There's almost an equal chance when you look at that of Republicans ending up in control of the House or Democrats retaining control of the House.
Wow. Now, Steve, as I understand this projection, so as you said, 218 is what you need for a House majority. The projection is 219 Republican seats with a margin of error, effectively, of 13 seats. Are we also able to say conclusively that there is no chance we will know tonight who will control the House?
I can't officially make that call for the decision desk, but
Here before we are able to move on. At this hour, NBC News can project a winner in the governor's race in Minnesota. The Democratic incumbent Tim Walz has been reelected in the Minnesota governor's race. We've also just had polls close in Hawaii. In the Hawaii U.S. Senate race, we've got a Democratic incumbent, Brian Schatz, facing a Republican challenge from Bob McDermott. This is too early to call, but Schatz is leading. In the Hawaii governor's race, the Hawaii governor's race at this hour is too early to call, but we can say the Democratic candidate, Josh Green, is leading in the Hawaii governor's race. We also have a statewide race to tell you about that's of national interest in Michigan. The Secretary of State, the incumbent Democratic Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, was facing a challenge from a very, very right-wing pro-Trump candidate on the Republican side named Christina Caramo. Jocelyn Benson has been reelected. The incumbent will stay as Secretary of State in the great state of Michigan. Chris. You guys, we have a big call to make. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm going to do so immediately, and then you're going to know why I did it. NBC News now projects that in the Senate race in the great state of Pennsylvania, Democrat John Fetterman has won. This is a Democratic gain. John Fetterman defeating Republican candidate Mehmet Oz in Pennsylvania. We had previously characterized this as too early to call with Fetterman in the lead. I was on the verge of asking Steve Kornacki if he agreed with that Fetterman in the lead characterization. And now NBC News projects this as a win for the Democrats and a pickup for the Democrats, which could be the ball game. 47 seats in the Senate held by Democrats, 46 held by the Republicans, and 7 seats yet to be decided. Steve, we've got to go to you on this immediately. Tell us what this means.
Yeah, so as you say, now you have your first flip in the Senate on the night. So
I apologize for breaking in the middle of the victory speech for John Fetterman in the Pennsylvania Senate race, but this is an important projection. NBC News now projects that in the governor's race in Wisconsin, the Democratic incumbent, Tony Evers, who had a tough fight on his hands, Tony Evers is reelected as the Democratic governor of Wisconsin. NBC News can also project that in the United States Senate race in Utah, Republican incumbent Mike Lee will be returning to the United States Senate. He was facing an interesting challenge from an independent candidate, Evan McMullin, who, unlike other independents in the Senate, said that he would not caucus with either party. That would have made the math really interesting in the Senate, but Mike Lee will be returning. The Senate at this hour, Democrats hold 47 seats. Republicans hold 47 seats. There are 6 seats that are as yet undecided. Well, let's go to Steve right now in terms of what we are learning out of Wisconsin. Steve?
Yeah, I mean, 2 just
in the great state of Michigan. NBC News can now project that in the great state of Michigan, in the governor's race, Democratic incumbent governor Gretchen Whitmer has been reelected. Seen just in the last few minutes, we've got a reelected Democratic governor in Michigan. We've got another one in Wisconsin. This was a pickup that the Republicans, I think, felt actually quite confident about. But we see Gretchen Whitmer returning to the State House there. Steve, I'm sorry to have interrupted you there, but that's big news in terms of the governors.
No, that absolutely is. And
I'm sorry to interrupt. We have had a poll closing in Alaska since we've been on the air. In Alaska, in the Senate race in Alaska, NBC News at this hour. Excuse me, there is a call, a projected winner, forgive me. In the Hawaii Senate race, Democratic incumbent Brian Schatz is the Democratic senator in Hawaii who tonight was on the ballot, and he is projected to be reelected to his Senate seat. Now we will go up to Alaska, forgive me, where we have had poll closings as of 1 a.m. Eastern time. Now this is interesting. This is a Republican on Republican Senate race in Alaska. The incumbent Lisa Murkowski facing a Republican challenger who is a Trump-endorsed candidate. Right now, this is too early to call, with just over 1/4 of the vote in. Lisa Murkowski, the incumbent Republican, facing a Republican challenger. This will be a ranked choice voting decision in Alaska. In the governor's race in Alaska, we're also looking at a race that is too early to call. The incumbent Republican there is Mike Dunleavy. He's facing a challenge from Bill Walker. That is too early to call in the Alaska governor's race. We were talking earlier, just a few minutes ago, about political accountability, and I think the cliche at this hour has a projection to make in the governor's race in the state of Hawaii. The Democratic candidate in Hawaii, Josh Green, is the projected winner of the Hawaii governor's race. That's a hold for the Democratic Party in that race. I should also tell you that while we have been on the air just these last few minutes, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has issued a statement on the results of tonight's midterm elections. I'll read it to you in full. It says,
you're watching our very late night or very early morning coverage of the 2022 midterm elections. Joining us now, the re-elected Democratic Congresswoman from California, Maxine Waters, from California's 43rd Congressional District. Congresswoman,
actually lurches further to the right, this is going to be a problem for a lot of mainstream Republicans who'd like to get elected in 2024 after seeing that this was their best chance to have a red wave.
Out of the Southwest, what does that tell you about the future of the Democratic Party?
That the party needs to invest in infrastructure, continue to invest in places like Nevada, in Arizona. I agree with folks as well, though, that say we should have invested more in North Carolina. I mean, there was Sherry Beasley right there.
In states like Nevada and states like at the border, as you said, in states like Arizona, this is a huge opportunity for Democrats, and there's no indication it's moving toward Republicans.
And by the way, this is a district that was flipped back, and we heard so much about this, that this was going to be an example of the red wave for Hispanics. Right. Not even close.
Well, yeah, because I think there was a sense that if there was going to be a red wave, you were going to see
It's the morning after an election that has defied expectations, and in some key races, it's left more questions than answers. At this hour, we still don't know who will control the Senate, as races in Arizona, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Georgia remain uncalled. We also don't know who will control the House. But one thing we do know is that outside of Florida, the anticipated red wave did not materialize.
Indeed, we're also following governor's races where there is a little more certainty. Still, several races, including close contests in Nevada and Arizona, are still uncalled. And moments ago, NBC News projected that Kansas Democratic Governor Laura Kelly won her bid for a second term.
Steve Kornacki is at the big board for a close.
I'm the child of an immigrant, child of a working class mom. As you said, I'm an openly gay woman and a former school teacher. There were so many reasons why people didn't think we'd be able to pull this off, but we really tapped into this feeling that Vermonters had, that they really wanted a message of courage and kindness and really trying to pull our communities back together. And it was a broad coalition that we put together. I couldn't be more.
Not only are you the first Black woman elected to the United States House of Representatives of Pennsylvania, but 4 years ago, you were the first Black woman elected to Pennsylvania's State House. That seems like that's very belated, but
a Democrat, but it's a big move for you to go from the state legislature, House of Representatives, now to the House in Washington. What made you decide to make the run for Congress?
I made the decision to run for Congress because of my community. We desperately need a voice that is going to stand up for us.
In that area, Democratic Congressman Pat Ryan, whose opponent has conceded the race, joins us next.
Attorney General Democratic incumbent Keith Ellison projected to win that race. At one point, during this campaign season, Ellison was dubbed Minnesota's most vulnerable progressive in a race here where crime was a big issue from his Republican opponent. Ellison was targeted on that front. What do you think it says that voters in your state are keeping Ellison in office?
I think there's a bigger story than that. Keith had a different view than I did when it came to a ballot measure on defund the police. But I think what...
A lot. Let me see. Is this right? 75% of the vote. Good Lord, that is a whooping. That is a huge margin politically speaking. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. So you're what the House looks like next term. You've got to look at what the House looks like, on Friday here with the balance of power still up in the air. NBC's estimate is that when all the votes are counted, the projection is that Republicans would have 220 seats, Democrats 215. That number has actually inched closer a little bit to the Democratic side. And look at the margin there, plus minus 7, right? A 7-seat margin of error, meaning we really cannot say for sure either way. In outstanding outstanding races, too, the reason why these numbers are changing is because we've just made a new projection in a key district in Maryland, Maryland 6, okay? This is a Democratic seat, projecting David Trone is going to win re-election here. Now, not altogether shocking, but this had been considered Maryland's most competitive House seat. And again, NBC News making this new projection here. We're still waiting on a bunch of seats in California, one in New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, etc. But even with that as the landscape and the backdrop, Sahil, you've got Republicans still moving ahead with plans to figure out who's going to lead the chamber, with our reporting saying that Kevin McCarthy.
And I should say we actually just got some news. Actually, let me give you this news. Nevada Governor Joe Lombardo, who is the Clark County Sheriff there, and the Republican, is projected now to be the winner of that gubernatorial race against Steve Sisolak, the incumbent. We learned that Steve Sisolak has conceded that race. You can see he's down there by about 21,000 votes. In a very different position, we should say, than the statewide race of Catherine Cortez Masto, who is the Democratic incumbent there, who is right now down by about 900 votes. So there's a 20,000 vote difference between the
Republicans have failed to flip any congressional district in the state of Nevada. And tonight, NBC has projected a winner for Nevada's 3rd congressional district, Democratic incumbent Susie Lee. And that is not an insignificant loss for the GOP. The Conservative Congressional Leadership Fund, it's a super PAC. They spent more on that one House race than they did in any other congressional district in the country. So,
statewide in this. Now let's take a look. And there it is.
There it is. We are now projecting that Mark Kelly is the projected winner in the Arizona Senate race. Mark Kelly being reelected to a 6-year term as Arizona's Democratic senator. Mark Kelly just making it into that projection right now with the return. Steve Kornacki has just reported to you where he picked up a gain of votes against Blake Masters in a batch of votes that were supposed to be stronger for the Republican candidate according to past patterns. But this is the year where past patterns don't tell us much about where we are now. We now have a tie in the United States Senate of 49 elected Democrats, 49 Republicans, and we have 2 Senate races left to be decided. In Nevada, we have the Senate race where they're still counting votes tonight, and on December 6th in the state of Georgia will be the final Senate race decided, where Senator Raphael Warnock is running for re-election against Herschel Walker. Attention will soon be turning now to Nevada, especially tonight with more numbers coming in there. Steve, describe how this final set of returns became the decisive set of returns.
Yeah.
Democratic Congressman Greg Stanton of Arizona, who represents Maricopa County and couldn't have a bigger smile on his face tonight. He has been reelected, but presidential elections. What does it mean to the country and to the rest of the country that there will be an honest Secretary of State in Arizona?
Well, we all know from the presidential race last time that Arizona is a state where Donald Trump.
I want to ask for your commentary on everything I've just said, right? You've heard me talk about not normal Republicans. You've heard me talk about election deniers. You've heard me talk about Liz Cheney. You've heard me talk about Adam Frisch.
Make it a lot better. And I've been reassuring folks in my district who are understandably upset. We worked so hard on our race. We feel like
in Connecticut. Representative Hayes, good to see you. Thank you for being with us this morning. Tell me about your race and what you contended with that you either expected or didn't in your victory.
Good morning, Allie. Thanks so much for having me. This was
during all those times to say, no, I'm going to stick with him. And so I think that's what she's doing now. She's trying to make a power play. She's making a bet that if I stick with him early, the base will stick with him. I really hope she's wrong. But every time before this, that's been the right play. So we'll see.
Congressional district. NBC News has projected that Democratic Congressman and Vice Chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Stephen Horsford, has defeated his Republican opponent, candidate Sam Peters. Congressman Horsford joins me now. Welcome.
It's on your life as he has on mine. To start, how are you feeling about being elected to represent Illinois, and specifically Chicago, where you were born and raised, but also where your family has a...
Is that you had a person who voted for impeaching Donald Trump. She gets removed as a result of a more extreme candidate, extreme candidate, a Republican who does not win and believes in election denialism, Joe Kent. And then what happens? The public says, no, we're not going to go down that road with election denialism.
I don't disagree with you.
I believe that maybe with very limited, there it is. That's the check mark.
Oh, wow.
Catherine Cortez Masto declared by our decision desk the winner of the Nevada Senate race. With Catherine Cortez Masto's victory in the Nevada Senate race, Democrats now have control of the United States Senate insured. They have their 50 seats, with Kamala Harris casting the tie-breaking vote that guarantees Democratic control of the Senate for the next 2 years.
Steve, I was about to ask you what else we're expecting from Nevada, but it does not matter at this point. We are now calling that Catherine Cortez Masto has been re-elected to the United States Senate in the state of Nevada. This now gives the Democrats the 50 seats they require to maintain control of the United States Senate. There is still one unsettled race, that is Georgia, which will go to a runoff on December 6th. But now this becomes a very, very different discussion. In a midterm election, with a deeply unpopular president running at 44%, a whole lot of issues that otherwise were supposed to disadvantage Democrats, a historical precedent lost. By the way, doesn't count because Pennsylvania doesn't elect its Secretary of State, but the gubernatorial candidate there, Doug Mastriano, had said that he would appoint someone who would do the same thing. So we'll take that as a win as well. Over all states, only one election denier running for Secretary of State anywhere won. Diego Morales in deep red Indiana has prevailed. Here's an amazing statistic.
In New York, I mean, first, we had key incumbents in competitive districts retire, particularly in Long Island. And when you lose the benefit of incumbency, it puts you at greater risk of losing those races. Second, as you pointed out, the Court of Appeals struck down the congressional lines, and then a special master appointed by a Republican judge drew lines that were much more favorable to the Republican Party, which is a circumstance that no one, not even the pundits, saw coming. And the third is the Zeldin effect. A case could be made that Lee Zeldin had the same effect in New York in 2022 that Donald Trump had nationwide in 2020, even though the two of them lost. They're down ballot.
Can you believe that it's taken this long? Also making history, Delia Ramirez, whose decisive victory in Illinois' 3rd congressional district means she will serve as the state's first Latina member of Congress, and Representative-elect Ramirez is joining me now. Hey, congratulations.
When things were bad, we had to fight. So we just kind of kept on going, and we focused on getting out the vote. Even though there was this BS narrative about Latinos moving away hard against Democrats, we knew that we had to stick to what we know, and that's that if you get the Latinos to come out and vote, they will vote for Democrats. But
while voters might have turned away from some of these far-right candidates, others prevailed. Self-described Christian nationalist Marjorie Taylor Greene held onto her House seat in deep red Georgia. And Florida in a deep red congressional district.
And as of now, Republicans are still favored to win the House. NBC News projects Republicans with 219 seats to the Democrats as 216, with a critical 4-seat margin of error. But Democrats are already giving them a run for their money, pulling upsets in critical races. In Washington's 3rd congressional district, Democrat Marie Perez pulled an upset, defeating Republican Joe Kent, an election denier who vowed to investigate the 2020 election. Perez won in a heavily Republican-favored district that few saw as competitive for the Democrats. And this morning, Democrats picked up another seat in Colorado's 8th congressional district, with Yadira Carevio defeating Republican State Senator Barbara Kirkmeyer. Carevio has made history being the state's first Latina elected to Congress, and Republicans began the week confident.
We're getting some word from the control room about a call here, if I'm not mistaken. We are now projecting that Democratic Secretary of State Katie Hobbs is, in fact, the winner in the Arizona gubernatorial race. This will make her the Democratic governor of that state. She has, according to our projections, vanquished Kari Lake, local TV news personality who mounted an incredibly strong campaign. Katie Hobbs was the only statewide elected Democrat. She was the Secretary of State. She ran for governor, and it looks like she will be the next governor in Arizona. Steve?
Well, that's why I was kind of stalling for time here.
It's Thanksgiving Eve, and we are still doing election results because moments ago, the Alaska Division of Elections finished tabulating the votes from earlier this month, and we now have two breaking new election calls. NBC News just projected that Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski has won re-election, and Democrat Mary Peltola is the winner of the at-large congressional seat. Now, Congresswoman Peltola, the first Indigenous Alaskan to serve in Congress, defeated former governor and Republican vice presidential nominee Sarah Palin.
What does this look like statewide? Well, I'll let you take it from there because I think there's some news there.
That check mark is a consequential thing. NBC News can now project that the winner of the Georgia U.S. Senate election tonight is incumbent Democrat Raphael Warnock. You saw the math happen effectively live on your screen there. We see a difference here of just 26,000 votes between these two gentlemen with 94% of the vote in. We had previously characterized Senator Warnock as being in the lead. NBC News, again, now projects that the winner of this U.S. Senate race is the incumbent Democrat Raphael Warnock. Now, we saw, as these results came in around the state, we saw Mr. Walker do marginally better, particularly in small, rural, lightly populated, heavily Republican counties. That was not enough to make up for the improvement in standing that we saw from Senator Warnock in heavily Democratic areas. In larger, more populated Republican-leaning counties, Senator Warnock, we saw him cut into the kind of lead that Mr. Walker might otherwise have had. But the final result is now known. The U.S. Senate seat in Georgia will be held by Raphael Warnock. Voters in Georgia, for the fourth time in 2 years, choose Raphael Warnock as their senator for this seat. When Republican Senator Johnny Isakson retired, Senator Warnock ran for his seat, made it to the runoff, ran in the runoff, got the seat. That earned him 2 years. Then he decided to run for re-election, got to the runoff. Tonight is the runoff, and he is re-elected to the United States Senate. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that this is the first African-American man ever elected to a full term in the United States Senate from the great state of Georgia. Major moment.
Yeah. Wow.
That happened.
It shouldn't have had to happen. I think it is. We should note that it shouldn't have had to happen. I mean, the fact that he's had to run, 5 times in 2 years?
1 million times.
1 million times in 2 years is